and welcome Julia to the OPN channel. Julia Rubin is speaking to us tonight about Save Our Schools New Jersey. We appreciate her time and energy. It's our third in the series of the Attacks on Public Education week. I think we've all been exposed to a lot of information and a lot of positive information, which I'm grateful of. I want to welcome all the viewers and all the chatters and any of our other channels that are out there mirroring us. Thank you guys for your support. If you want to get in on the live questions, you can just hit our chat stream and we'll prompt you for when we're ready to do that. And we thank you guys for all tuning in. Public education is an important topic, and you guys heard me ramble on that a good bit last night. So I'll try to keep it contained and give Julia most of the airtime here. So welcome, Julia. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We're glad to have you, and if the producers would just give me a heads up if we're having any kind of audio or feed problems, then I'll adjust them on the fly. So all that kind of housekeeping work is done, so we'll just launch right into it because I don't want to tie up too much of your time when your daughter gets home, because I expect that's precious time. So maybe you could give us a more in-depth introduction about yourself and tell us how you came to be involved with public education, activism, and why.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So it began about 2 years ago, and as you know, we've been in a difficult economic environment, and in New Jersey we had a change of administrations right before then with a new governor, and the governor encouraged. Let me step back. New Jersey has kind of an unusual system where we vote on our school budgets at the local level. So we have about 600 school districts, a little bit less than that, and almost every community votes on whether its school budget is approved every year. And 2 years and change ago, the town where I live, Princeton, was going to vote on its school budget, and a group of us decided to ensure that the budget passed. And the reason we were concerned is that our new governor had encouraged communities basically to vote down their budget. And so we organized and did a calling tree by the parents and got the budget passed overwhelmingly. But it was pretty clear to us that the challenge for public education was not as simple as passing a local school budget, that there were significant threats to public education in the environment around us, and that now these threats had come to New Jersey as well. And so we went to see our local elected officials, or actually the senator who represents us in the New Jersey Senate, and we said we have this wild idea. There are 6 women, basically suburban moms. I mean, we work, we have kids, we have crazy lives, but we're really worried about public ed, and we're thinking that maybe we could start an organization and grow it statewide. And that organization would let legislators know that parents and other public school supporters really want them to do things that are protective of public education. And she said, "Oh, that's a great idea. Why don't you go do that?" And I think she thought, she'd never see us again. So that was August, 2 years ago, basically. And now we have over 9,000 members across the state. And the organization is called Save Our Schools NJ. So that's basically how I got involved. And a lot has happened in the last 2 years, but that's sort of the crux of the story.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it kind of falls and dovetails right in with what we were hearing from Joel and Anna last night about the community responding to the need and creating a solution in the face of challenges. I think it would be helpful if you speak to the quality of education in the New Jersey schools like we were talking about, just to give some context. And then also, if you could explain just a little bit more about how your county structure is, because there's all different kinds of school systems and all that. So just to lay some context for the rest of the discussion.
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of the way our schools are structured, we have, as I mentioned, we have about 582, I think, school systems in New Jersey, school districts in New Jersey, Some are quite small. Some are incredibly small. They don't even have all the different school levels. Like they might just have 20 or 30 or 40 kids. But most of them are obviously larger than that. And some are quite large, like cities like Newark, for example, or Trenton. I'm sorry, remind me of the second question.
How the structure was? Do you have like
Oh,
community
how
school
good New
boards,
Jersey
and
schools
how
are.
good
How
New
could I
Jersey
forget a
schools
question
were?
like that?
Yeah.
Sorry, senility sets in much earlier than people realize. So New Jersey schools are fantastic. Yeah, as we were talking before we went live, we are one of the top one, two, or three states nationally on basically every measure. In fact, there were a couple of bits of good news that came out just this week that were attested to the fact that our schools are excellent. And the reason our schools are so good is really twofold. And I didn't really go into the things that Save Our Schools NJ is trying to fight for beyond the broad issue of protecting public education. One of the things that we fight for is to protect our school funding system. And the reason New Jersey schools are so good, and the reason we've made such significant progress in achievement for students, regardless of their socioeconomic standing, students who are poor and students who are wealthy have all improved over the last 20 years. Now, they're not at the same place, but they've each improved significantly from where they were 20 years ago, is because we're one of the very few states that actually funds its schools and funds them fairly, regardless of whether a school has a lot of low-income children in it or middle-class children or wealthy children. So we redistribute resources from the wealthier districts to the poor ones. And there you can count on one hand how many states actually do that. And we do that because there was a court ruling that required that based on the New Jersey Constitution. And there have been a number of efforts to undermine that, but it has held up to the present time. But the threat has never been as great as it is right now to that redistribution of funding. And that's one of the things that we are fighting to protect, is to ensure that regardless of whether a child is wealthy or poor, that child has the resources within their school system to ensure that New Jersey continues to have some of the best schools in the country. That's one of the main reasons. The other reason New Jersey has such good schools is we have overall wealthy population, and there is a very strong correlation between academic achievement and income, because kids who live in poverty, as you know, have to deal with all sorts of challenges that make it very difficult for them to excel in school at a level comparable to wealthier kids. That's why you need more resources to offset all those challenges.
Right.
So
what we have here is a state that has, relatively speaking, a highly functioning school public education system. So the parents
yes.
and the people of the communities have a vested interest in protecting them, because we don't want to see a decline. We want to see an improvement. So that sets the stage for the rest of the conversation. So now I would like...
Can I just add,
Yes, please.
Can I just add one quick thing? There are two reasons people move to New Jersey. I mean, this is not my opinion. This is factual. There are two primary reasons why people cite that they move to New Jersey: nearby access to jobs in New York and Philadelphia, as well as in the state, and high quality public education. So when I say that we have great schools, I mean, this is the driver of our economy. It's not just the fundamental of our, social fabric. It's not just the thing that ensures a future for our kids. It is the very basic economic necessity for why people come to our state. So it's pretty critical in every way.
A good point made there. Last night, the guest helped us to understand that the neighborhood schools that were highly functioning were desirable. That's what brought people in. If you close those schools down, the people had no reason to stay, and then there would be an exodus. So all these things are important, and that there's so many levels of detail that plays to. I want to get into what your primary issues are that public education faces in New Jersey, but not only New Jersey, if you can place that in context nationwide.
Right. So we formed, because we're an all-volunteer organization, so we don't even have 501c3 status. We've grown, obviously, significantly in terms of membership, but we continue to be all-volunteer run, all-volunteer staffed, and we've created an entity, but we are completely unincorporated. And because we're all volunteer run, and because we have small kids and, jobs and crazy lives, we've limited our scope to what we felt at the beginning were the three most critical threats facing our schools. And we've expanded a little bit since then, but they basically are adequate funding. And as we talked about, we have had 20 some years of fair funding where, regardless of income level, the schools are funded. So we want to preserve that and maintain that. The second issue was vouchers. So taxpayer-funded vouchers for private and religious school, which we do not have in New Jersey and we do not want. The people of New Jersey actually consistently say they don't want them. Unfortunately, our governor wants them very much. It's become part of the mantra for Republican politicians, which is really unfortunate because public education is not something that is unique to either party. And, we are a nonpartisan group and we'd like to see Republicans and Democrats and independents support public education. And for the most part, they do. So we oppose vouchers, and we can talk about all the many, many reasons why vouchers are a very bad idea. And the third issue, and the one that's probably become what we've become most famous for, is charter school reform. And Save Our Schools NJ is not against charter schools. We think that if a community wants to start a charter school or to host a charter school, that's absolutely that community's decision. We're very big believers in local democratic control of public education. And so if a particular community thinks that makes sense for them, we don't think other people should tell them what to do. But the New Jersey charter school law, which is over 15 years old, doesn't give communities that ability. In our state, that decision is made entirely by one person, the Commissioner of Education, who is an appointed official, appointed by a political leader at the state level, obviously. And the local communities have to pay for the charter schools out of their school funding, which is mostly local property taxes. The wealthier communities, it's almost entirely local property taxes, and then it depends on how much state aid a community is getting is based on their income. So the poorer the community, the less local taxation funds their schools. But for most of the districts in this state, they are locally funded. And so the school's funding gets diverted to charter schools, but the community doesn't have the right to say no, or this school is right for us, or that charter school isn't. They really have no control whatsoever. And so part of the reforms that we have been seeking for 2 years is to change New Jersey's charter law to give local communities the ability to vote when a new charter school is proposed. We've also been pushing to change the charter law in several other ways, and perhaps the other most significant thing, we have 2 bills that we've been advocating for that have done quite well. They've passed one of our 2 houses. And the second bill is a kind of a combination of a number of reforms around transparency, financial and educational transparency and accountability. But perhaps the biggest and most important issue in that bill is segregation. And this is none of this is unique to New Jersey. Some states, charter laws vary by state. The only thing you can really say about charter schools across the country is that they are privately managed and publicly funded and regulated to some degree. The regulation level varies by state, but otherwise the laws are so different. Each state has different laws, and some states still don't have charter schools. In New Jersey, the fact that the Commissioner of Education decides if a charter school opens, that's fairly unique. There aren't very many states like that. In a lot of states, it's local school boards that make that decision. Some states have commissions. But what is fairly consistent across the country is the segregation. And what I'm talking about is that because of the way charter schools admit students, which is done by lottery generally, so anyone who's interested in applying to be in the school puts in an application for their child, and then if there's too many applicants, the charter school conducts a lottery to draw the children that will be admitted. The children that whose names tend to be put into that lottery tend to skew towards wealthier. Now, wealthier is a relative component, right? So if you have a very poor population, they might be the wealthiest of that. So they're less likely, for example, to be kids who are homeless or who are, just very, very poor because their parents are generally too busy just trying to put food on the table or find a home for their family. Right. Or even if they're not homeless, if they're just very poor, the challenges of just surviving tend to be such that the parents are not really dealing with, there's this charter school or there's this traditional school, what am I going to do? So they're not really functioning at that level, and so they're not applying. So they tend to be, the kids who get into the lottery tend to be wealthier. They also are much less likely to be kids who don't speak English. for the obvious reason that parents who don't speak English don't even know about charter schools, and they're not going to apply. So a lot of the recent immigrants, and particularly Latinos, are significantly underrepresented among charter school families. And then the third group is kids with special needs. And it may be, I mean, some of it is that the families are self-selecting. They're saying, you know, my child is in a traditional public school system with 3,000 students or 4,000 students. I don't want to take them and put them into a small charter school because their needs are not going to be met if they have special needs. Sometimes it's that the charter school discourages the kids and counsels them out. We know of numerous cases like that. I mean, people who've come and spoken to us. The net result of all that in New Jersey and nationally is segregation, where the charter schools end up with a significantly different population of students than the traditional public schools. Kids who are easier to educate, kids who are less expensive to educate. And the flip side of that is that the traditional public schools end up with a concentration of more difficult and more expensive to educate children. But because charter schools exist and have taken some of the resources, the traditional public schools now have fewer dollars with which to actually educate these children. And that kind of segregation is horrendous. In fact, our schools in some ways are more segregated now than they were before Brown versus Board of Education. It's a different kind of segregation. It's not just racial. It's economic and needs and language ability, but it's horrendous. So that's one of the things that we have been battling, is to change that.
I'm trying to catch up. This is really interesting. No, this is good. I'm trying to absorb it, and so I can formulate an intelligent question. So I do want to visit all those topics you just mentioned, but since we got into charters a little bit deeper to begin with, let's continue on with that. So
Sure.
I want to make sure I have this picture. In New Jersey, there's one person who has arbitrary decision-making power about where charter schools are located. So,
Right.
for instance, in your neighborhood or your school district, that person could say, okay, we're going to put a charter school in this school district. It has to be.
Well, somebody has to apply. I'm sorry, somebody has to apply to open a charter school.
Okay, well, that's a
The
given
commissioner
because it's a
doesn't.
profit making. Yeah, we'll just assume somebody's out there trying to skim the cream on that, right? So
Well, I mean, to be clear, New Jersey does not allow for-profit charter schools, and that's one of the things that we will fight very hard to defend, that there will be no for-profits. Now, there are for-profits trying to sneak in so that there's a nonprofit shell in the for-profits. Actually, there's a whole other discussion. We have this whole issue now with virtuals, which I'm sure we'll get to. But we don't have straight for-profit charter management companies, which is a very good thing because the literature on those is consistently horrible.
right.
That they are a bad idea.
Okay.
But
Well, I
I
think.
just wanted to clarify. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you for that. And it also helps me to bypass my soliloquy and get down to the root question of the transparency process around the lottery. Because, I mean, is that open? Is it visible? Can people check on that? Because the segregation thing really concerns me, and I can see how a school that goes to a lottery at that point can be easily manipulated to get the student population. So I was just wondering about the checks and balances on that.
Right. So I don't think most charter schools do it openly. But I don't want to imply that they are stacking the decks in those lotteries. I think that for the most part, what happens is they run an open and honest lottery. It's just that the people who are applying don't reflect the broader community
Okay.
for the reasons that I mentioned.
Right.
And then I think once the kids get in, it may be like with the special needs children in particular, that there are some schools that are encouraging kids to leave who have special needs. But I don't think it's that there's broad scale cheating on the lottery.
Uh-huh.
It's more a function of, I mean, this is a problem with quote unquote choice, public school, choice in education. This is a problem across the board. Vouchers are worse.
Right.
Those states that have vouchers, you have much more segregation because people self-select for various reasons, and they don't necessarily self-select in ways that we might want to encourage. And that might be fine in the private sector in the sense that, you can choose who you're friends with, you can choose who you work with to some degree, but this is a taxpayer-funded public good. So segregation, among your friends, I mean, if you don't want to hang out with people who don't speak English, that's your prerogative.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about who goes to school with whom, that's a little bit, that's a very different ballgame, right?
Right, right.
So,
Um, and I appreciate you speaking, you know, to the not-for-profit and everything too, because it's an easy assumption to leap to, that it's otherwise. And I had another question about the charter school, but it went out of my head, so I want to move
sorry.
on. No, that's fine. It'll come back to me at the most inopportune time. So let's get into the voucher thing a little bit, because these are some things that I'm not familiar with because I live in a very rural area, very small school systems, and so um, maybe explain the voucher system to us and why that is so problematic and why you're so resistant.
Well, vouchers are, the concept of vouchers is that taxpayers pay a certain amount of money, give a certain amount of money to individual families who have children, and that family can choose to use that to attend private school, non-denominational, or a religious school.
Mm-hmm.
And up until a little over 20 years ago, we really didn't have vouchers. They could not withstand the constitutional challenge, and there was never popular support for them. They've been defeated at the ballot box virtually every time. I think only once were they not defeated at the ballot box. But the number of families with children has been declining, and this is actually a theme that's really critical, not just for vouchers, but for the attack on public education more broadly. There are fewer families that have children in school, and the families that have children in school are increasingly poorer and more likely to be people of color versus the people who are paying for those schools. I think that is a huge reason why there is this attack on public education. There are fewer people advocating for public education because there are fewer parents.
Right.
And the people who go to public school tend to be less powerful and poor. And, those two things are interrelated. So I think that is, and they don't look like the people who are paying the taxes for a big chunk of the people who are paying for those schools are older and white, and they don't relate to the kids. They feel like they're not their kids, and so they're much less willing to pay for their education. I think that is a big factor. But anyway, coming back to vouchers, sorry, I went off the reservations there a little bit. So taxpayer dollars are used to give a voucher to a family, and the family can choose to go to any private or public school, I guess, that it wants to, but basically it's for private school. And the origin of vouchers actually, I think, came into existence post-Reconstruction in the South, because families didn't want to have their kids, not go to school with black children. And so they've sort of resurfaced in the last 20 plus years. Perhaps the oldest voucher program in the country is in Milwaukee, a sort of traditional program that doesn't have some very specialized niche, because there are voucher programs for special needs children, for example, or voucher programs in very rural areas where you don't have enough families to actually have a traditional public school. They might use vouchers in some states to let them, do other things, which is understandable, right? That's a practical thing. Mm-hmm. So in Milwaukee, there has been a voucher program operating for more than 20 years. And what we see in the research is, first of all, those who were promoting vouchers. I mean, there's been an effort to privatize public education through vouchers for many years, like 50 plus years. But there wasn't really, it didn't take. The argument that was used historically was that people who go to private school are being double taxed. So they're paying tuition and then they're paying taxes for public education. And that argument just really didn't fly. But then a little more than 20 years ago, they figured out that they could argue it a slightly different way, which was that kids who are going to school in concentrated poverty environments are really not getting a good education. And if you give them a voucher, you give that family an option to go somewhere else. They can go to a private school or a religious school. I think the mantra now is, of the voucher proponents, is that, zip code should not be your destiny. Well, that all sounds great, but the reality doesn't quite reflect that, that picture that they're painting. And the first piece of that reality is that the kids who get vouchers and who leave these supposedly terrible urban schools, they don't actually do any better. So if you look at Milwaukee, they now have 20 plus years of data. And there was a standardized test given to the students in the Milwaukee voucher who received a voucher in Milwaukee, so in the private schools, versus the kids who go to the traditional public schools in Milwaukee. And the Milwaukee public schools are terribly underfunded. So these are not lavish public institutions. And the kids who got vouchers actually did worse on these standardized tests than the kids in the Milwaukee traditional public schools. And this has been repeated consistently in every state that has a voucher program. The children do not do better than the children in the traditional public schools, and often they do worse. So that's the first problem with the vouchers. The second problem is the segregation. The segregation is actually much worse than with the charter students, in that in Georgia they passed a voucher law a couple of years ago, and it's been just a disaster. And you've seen, I mean, I can send you some citations if your viewers are interested in actually reading some of this information. But you've seen just this, tremendous racial segregation, where the vouchers are being used by families to send their kids to religious schools that are very homogenous racially and economically and obviously religiously. So there's the segregation issue. There's also the turnover. In Milwaukee, you have kids, you have something like, I think it's 75% of the students return to, I may be a little bit off on that figure, but it's roughly that, return to the traditional public schools within 3 years. So they get a voucher, they go to one of these schools, they're disillusioned, and they come back. So it's not a very effective system, to say the least. But it also drains a lot of resources from the traditional public schools, because most of these voucher systems are funded out of the public school budgets. And even if they're not coming directly out of the public school budgets, they are taking resources that, it makes it more difficult to allocate those resources to the public schools. Mm-hmm. So it's just a terrible idea. And ultimately, it really breaks down the commitment, the social support that public education requires. If everybody just gets, their own little pot of money, it's not a common good anymore, right? We're just shopping. We're each getting our little bit of...
It's a consumer product.
Yeah, it becomes an individual consumer product instead of a public good, where there's capital committed by all of us, and the children belong to all of us. We're all responsible for the education of those kids. That's what public education ultimately is. And of course, it's not locally democratically controlled. It's a consumer good that each family buys for itself. And those families that are better able to shop do better, and those families that are less able to shop do much, much worse.
Yep. And that helped me remember what my earlier comment was, that it seems to me that the charter schools and the voucher systems both have a disadvantageous side to it for people because of the mechanisms. And so people with lower incomes that are trying to get by, they're just trying to get through the day, get good educations for their kids. They don't have the luxury of time or resources, or maybe not the education they need themselves to navigate these systems, so they just fall by the wayside. So it is discriminatory by mechanism. Maybe not deliberately, but the reality of it is, and that's what leads to all the segregations and things, are part of the reason. It's the mechanisms are so difficult to navigate. So so I think I got vouchers, and I think I understand the charter schools, and I'm looking through my notes, and so when I look off to the side, it's because I'm looking through my notes.
Well, I just wanted to say that the other thing we didn't really talk about, which is kind of related to the charter schools, is the virtual charter schools. We have not had those in New Jersey. Those are a disaster. They
well, could you define that for us first? Virtual charter school?
A virtual charter school is a school that provides content over the internet to a child sitting in front of a computer. So imagine a 5-year-old spending, 6 to 8 hours in front of a computer instead of going to school with other children. A 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, whatever age. There are two very profitable and rapidly growing firms, K-12 and Connections Inc., who pretty much own this market. They provide content to these virtual schools, and they manage a number of the virtual schools. They are for-profit companies. The CEO of K-12 made over $5 million, I believe, last year, and the firm's revenues doubled in 1 year. And it's all taxpayer dollars. It's all public education dollars. The fact that they're so profitable is not even the worst. The worst is that they are an academic disaster, absolute disaster. The New York Times and the Washington Post both ran large exposés last year on virtual charters that showed that their academic achievement levels are laughable. That two children that start at comparable levels, one at a traditional school and one at a virtual school, the virtual student's going to fall behind within a year or two, quite dramatically. So New Jersey has not had these schools. In fact, our charter law does not allow them. It forbids them. But there has been a significant push by the current acting commissioner of education. He hasn't been confirmed, to bring in these virtual schools. And so we now have, in this last cycle, we fought him back on the virtuals, but he approved 2 hybrid virtuals, which are basically just virtuals, but they have a building somewhere that at some point during the year the children might come into. And one of the schools is going to be managed and provided content by K-12, this for-profit firm. K-12 is so disreputable that they've been sued by their own shareholders for lying to them, and their academic performance again is abysmal. But they make a lot of money. So we've been fighting that whole battle, and that's a national battle as well. Next door in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, there are 9 virtual charter schools. Every single one underperforms the traditional public school system. It's just a disaster. But despite that, they spend a lot of money lobbying, and they have been very effective in buying their way into a number of states. So if you don't have them in your state, watch for them, because they're coming.
That is just so tragic and so disturbing. I mean, I don't know anything about it, but it just is a bad idea. I know it intuitively. There's too much money, there's too little control, and there's no way that a child sitting in an isolated instance is going to develop skills they need to be, fully educated people.
And that assumes that child's actually following, is actually on the computer. They don't have any way of verifying what the child is doing. They're assuming that there's a parent in that home who's serving as a teacher, because it's really homeschooling, right? It's on the internet. Now, there might be some families for whom this is great, and they can get that content, and if the content's decent, then, the parents who would otherwise be homeschooling anyway can use that content to augment the child's education. Mm-hmm. But it's not restricted to those families. So you could have a parent who's not even in the house. You could have a parent who's got a job on the side that they're doing while they're ostensibly supervising. You can think of a myriad of circumstances. You could have a child who has special needs. There's no provision for any of this. Mm-hmm. And there's really no way to tell if the child is taking that instruction or not. So anyway, and by the way, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which I'm guessing some of your viewers might be familiar with, they've been in the news a lot. They are a corporate-created organization that is used. You probably know about them already, so forgive me for repeating all this. But in case anyone hasn't heard of ALEC, they're an opportunity for corporations to disseminate model legislation in various areas, including education. Very very ideologically driven conservative legislation. And one of the big tenets in education is these virtual schools. There's a sub-area within ALEC for virtual education, and K-12 is part of their corporate membership, and I believe Connections Inc. is as well. And they have been pushing these bills state by state to allow virtual charters. So just to connect kind of the corrupt dots a little bit.
Well, thank you for doing that, because that's really important to know. And yeah, we are pretty familiar with ALEC and all the nonsense they do. And so I need to digress for just a second, because you cite a lot of facts and figures. I feel quite comfortable that there is more to you than meets the eye, because you're so well informed and all that. But I want to know how big the organization is, because you guys are taking on a huge responsibility, and it's more than 6 suburban moms, I know. So statewide, how many people are we talking about in the organization working on these things?
Well, We have 9,000 members, but that means people who are on our list who've indicated they want to be kept informed. And so we communicate with them electronically and let them know when issues are coming up, and they get in touch with their legislators. We have 40 legislative districts in New Jersey, and obviously we have members in every one of them. Some districts we might have 100 people, and some districts we might have 2,000 people. And we're growing very rapidly. Obviously, we started with 6 people. Now we have 9,000 2 years later. But and on top of that, we have 50 what we call organizers, which are individuals all across the state who are very engaged. These are all volunteers. They're very engaged in their communities and in public education in their communities. And we have weekly conference calls, and we do a whole bunch of stuff together to stay on top of these issues, to inform each other of what's happening on the ground in those communities, as well as in Trenton, where the legislature meets. And when we need to take action, we do so. You know, if we need to turn people out, we let our membership know, and they come out. If we need them to call legislators, they do. In fact, we had, when we were trying to stop these virtual charter schools, we put a petition online, and the petition would generate emails to legislators as well as the acting commissioner of education. And I understand we crashed his email account because we had thousands of people signing. And so he had so many emails come in that I think it did bad things to his system, which was not our intention, but just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the number of people who get engaged.
Yeah, well, I asked that question for a specific reason because it's pretty obvious it's an admirable organizing effort, and to have done that over the course of 2 years and have that many people involved and have it organized and targeted and focused is really impressive. And there's an object lesson in that because I'm really big on transferable skills and transferable models. So you can take that same sort of structure and apply it across the board to any problem, and it shows what can be done. And this is what we try to do on this channel, is illustrate what can be done by people who get rallied together. So I just wanted to get the scope of the organization. So thank you for sharing that. And I want to go back to, we talked a good bit about the physical starvation and how you guys are addressing that. But I would like to spend a little bit more time on the maintaining local control, or working against the loss of local control, because this sounds like a truly an individual community movement, community to community, but you're still connecting the dots and having the unified forces. So I want to hear a little bit more about the local control issues.
You mean in terms of Save Our Schools NJ, how we
right.
stay engaged at the local level? And well, most of our organizers are people who were already very engaged with their public schools. That's why they were drawn to us, and with their local public schools. That's why they were drawn to us, and that's why they committed their time. I mean, we have a conference call every Monday for 1 to 2 hours, and that's a big commitment, especially since most of them have jobs and families. And so the way that it works is we tend to only get engaged with statewide issues. So policy issues as an organization. For example, if a charter school is being proposed in a particular community, our organizers might be responding to that, whether positively or negatively. Like we had a charter school in Trenton that we really wanted to see stay open because it was a school that was strongly supported by the community and that was educating a very challenging population of kids, which is unusual in a charter school. And the commissioner actually forced them to close. So we're not just advocating on one side of the issues, but we don't tend to get engaged with individual charter schools like that. That was unusual because we felt that it was really emblematic of a broader issue of, sort of hierarchical decision making and leaving the community out of it. I mean, this is a school that the community wanted, the school board wanted, the children attending the school wanted. What right does the commissioner have to come in and force the school to close? And the school was actually doing fine. The commissioner argued that they had bad test scores, but that was disingenuous because for the population they were educating, they were actually doing better, slightly better than the district as a whole. It's just that they had something like 40% special needs kids, and test scores are a pretty bad measure of anything, especially if you're dealing with a population like that. So anyway, I digress a little bit, but in that situation, we dealt with a specific school. In general, we don't, but our organizers might.
Right.
So we're dealing with it at the policy level statewide.
Okay.
So we're advocating for, reforms to the charter law, but we might have an organizer on a call who says, well, this is what's happening in my community, and this is what we're doing locally about that. We don't get engaged with that as Save Our Schools NJ,
Okay.
but we know what's happening because they report back to us. And they're acting as just, individuals who happen to live in that community, whether they support the school or oppose it. They're just doing it on their own volition, but it gives us a tremendous network. So we know what's happening all over the state, and we're communicating constantly, electronically, phone or email. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah. Yes.
that's
Yes,
how
it
it
did.
works.
It cleared it up exactly. You're working at policy level. The organization works at state policy level.
Right.
You may or may not have people, well, most likely that are in the organization that work on their local level with their local things, but all that information's feeding in, so there's info sharing that you can use, and your communications methodologies are wonderful too. I mean, this is I love that kind of stuff, so I'm happy to see it in progress. It's interesting to me that your organization seems to focus on the particular quality, that you are not stuck on one side of the equation or the other, like this school in Trenton, which is a charter school, which you're generally not a proponent of. You were able to say that was a good situation, and we support good situations.
Well, we're not generally against charter schools. We are against the law in New Jersey as it currently stands.
Mhm.
If you have charter schools that represent their communities demographically, so they're not cream skimming as it's referred to, they're not just educating a subpopulation, and that community wants the school, why would we oppose that? I mean, the only thing, as I said, the only thing you can say about all charter schools is that they are publicly funded and regulated and privately managed. If they are really nonprofit, we're not philosophically, we don't have a position as to public management versus private management, as long as they are held to the same standard, transparent, and wanted by that community. You can certainly envision an environment where, let's say, the school board, the bureaucracy is not functioning, and the community really wants something different, or the bureaucracy is functioning and they want to experiment in some way, and they feel the charter school is a good opportunity to do that. That shouldn't be a decision that's made by one community on behalf of another. So as long as it's a local decision, a democratically reached decision, right? So everybody has a chance to weigh in, and the school does not segregate, and the school is transparent and open. We're not against any of that, right? What we're against is the way it works right now, where schools are imposed on communities, where schools are able to, whether intentionally or by virtue of the way that students are admitted, not reflect that community demographically, to segregate, where there's a lot of secrecy.
Right.
None of that is good for anything, but particularly for public education.
Right.
So I just want to be clear, we really are not against charter schools. And the reason we supported the school is because it was doing all the right things.
Right. It was
exactly
a good school that served the community.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Good. Well,
There's no reason not to.
right. I think that's a great example, just in other reasons, to not be so stuck on ideology that you just draw these hard lines, and that you want good schools that serve the community, and however that happens, that's what you're for.
Well,
How does New Jersey compare to like other states? Like, we talked with Oakland last night. I know Pennsylvania has just a terrible problem with public schools being closed. Philly, I think, closed 25 this year and looking at 40 next year. And so it sounds like you guys don't have that degree of a problem because you're getting in front of it. But what happens to the kids when a school closes?
Right. It's a disaster. I mean, closing schools is a really stupid strategy. It has never helped a child to close their school. And I think it's also another reflection of the general emphasis nationally by what, we call them school deformers, education deformers. I think they call themselves reformers, but there's no reform going on. The corporate education deformers, their agenda seems to be a very hierarchical one, which makes sense because if your model of success is a corporate model, you're looking at a hierarchical model, right? So it's anti-local democratic control. So they see things like school boards, which are sort of the tenets, the basic tenet of local democratic control of public education is an elected school board. They see that as an impediment to good education, which is crazy. The idea that some person, usually with a military or corporate background, who comes in after 6 months of training by those who feel they understand education because they've been successful in business, and who then tells the people on the ground whose kids are going to these schools and who are paying the taxes to fund the schools, it's going to be this way. I'm going to close this school and I'm going to close that school and I'm going to implement this and I'm going to implement that, and you have no say in it. That's just crazy. Nobody thinks that's a good idea, right? I mean, look what's happening in Chicago. They have a revolt on their hands. They have mayoral control. I mean, that's one manifestation of this hierarchy is mayoral control. You have that in New York. You've had mass demonstrations against school closings, against forced imposition of charter schools in Bloomberg's administration, right? By Bloomberg in New York City. You've had demonstrations in Chicago by parents, by teachers. This is just a bad idea. In a real democracy, you can only do this for so long. At some point, people just throw you out of office. In New Jersey, we have not had that, but it's right around the corner. So we have, how do I explain all this? So we have state-controlled districts. I think 20 some years ago, they passed a law that allowed the state to intervene in districts that were not functioning well, that were not performing well. And there are 3 districts that still have all or mostly state control. Newark, our big cities that are mostly populated by people of color, surprise, surprise. Newark, Paterson, and Jersey City are still either totally or partly under state control. And then Camden is not under state control directly, but their school board is now completely appointed by the mayor. And the mayor it's a recent thing, the mayor just threw out some of the prior school board members. She now has a board that is almost entirely of her appointment, and she is working very closely with the administration in Trenton. There's a lot of information that you have to understand New Jersey. We have, anyway, I won't bore you with all the minutiae, but basically, so we have these large cities that are either entirely or partially under state control. They don't have any local autonomy. I'll give you an example. So Newark has a superintendent who's been there about a year, and she's implementing a plan that is opposed. A lot of that plan is opposed by their elected school board. They have a school board that's called an advisory board, but it's a school board. I mean, they were completely democratically elected. And she proposed to close some schools and to co-locate charter schools with traditional public schools. This co-location took place in New York. It's been a really unpopular move, again, forced on the communities by Mayor Bloomberg, who has mayoral control of the schools. So in Newark, she proposed to do this and to co-locate the schools and to charge rent to the schools, to the charter schools that would be co-located. The school board in Newark, based on overwhelming popular rejection of this idea, voted it down. She overruled the school board. So you have an appointed official overruling popularly elected officials and forcing something on a community. Inconceivable, right? I mean, that's not a democracy. That's nothing like what a democracy looks like. But in that context, we are having school closings. The same thing is coming in Paterson. Paterson's a little behind. Newark's kind of leading in New Jersey on this school closing stuff. And it's going to probably happen in Camden as well. That's part one. Part two is the Obama administration, which has not been helpful on public education at all, has granted waivers to No Child Left Behind to a number of states. About half the states now have these waivers. And the way the waivers work is the state proposes an alternative to No Child Left Behind, and then the Obama Education Department decides whether to accept that and grant the waiver. New Jersey was one of the first states granted a waiver, even though public education advocates in the state encouraged the U.S. Department of Education not to rush the waiver. The Christie administration had provided a waiver proposal that was given very little time for public input. Very limited information was actually provided as to what this waiver would consist of. And we were in the first round, there was an opportunity to defer by 2 or 3 months and not make a decision right away. The Obama administration approved the waiver despite all that, and it was really not helpful. What's happening now with that waiver is the Christie administration, the Governor Christie in New Jersey, is planning to implement this program, which would effectively completely disenfranchise all the people who live in high poverty districts. The ones who aren't already disenfranchised through state control will now be disenfranchised through this waiver. And I have to say, we and others have tried to alert the Obama administration to this fact, their Department of Education, and they do not want to hear it. So they are a big part of the problem when it comes to K through 12 public education. But anyway, that we're nonpartisan. We will call a spade, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I mean, we will speak truth to power. So anyway, so we will have more school closings if we can't stop this. And it's a very unfortunate thing because, again, a school closing has never helped a single child. There was a big expose in the Daily News, I think last week, about how the schools that Mayor Bloomberg closed and reopened in some new configuration have just been a disaster. You can't take the parents and the voters out of public education and force your will on those families and expect it to succeed. This is just not the way it's done in a democracy.
Right. The fellow we had on last night made the point that we own the schools. And
absolutely.
But we think, or most people think that we don't, but we do own it, and we do have control. We do pay the taxes. We own the schools, and to have that sort of thing forced down upon us is immoral and unethical.
And it's our children.
Right.
It's our children who are attending those schools, right? So
I love what you said. A school closing never benefits a child. So
I think Diane Ravitch may have said it first, just to be fair. I'm not sure I originated that, but it's absolutely true. So
what type of, you spoke to actions that your organization may participate in. Could you give a couple of examples, like on the ground actions?
Right. We mostly ask our members to contact their legislators, because when we were first starting up, we were told by legislators that they don't ever hear from parents or public school supporters, and so they don't think they're paying attention. So when an issue comes up, we send an alert out to our members and say, this is the legislation that's being voted on, and this is what the issues are. Could you please call your legislator and let them know how you feel? We also have a website and we have a Facebook page that we maintain very actively, but only about 15% of our members, maybe even less, because some of the people who follow us on Facebook may not be getting our email alerts. So not all of our members follow us on Facebook. So we only send information out to our members when there's some action required, because we know people get a lot of email.
Right.
But one action said would be contacting the legislator. Another one might be to come to Trenton if there's a hearing or something's going on where it's a chance to testify or to show that you care about an issue. And people do come out. They absolutely come out.
So you have good public response to those calls for action.
People care. They know we have great schools, and they know it's worth fighting for.
What about the teachers' unions?
We don't really have a position on issues that pertain specifically to teachers, but it's difficult to be pro-public education and to be against teachers.
Right.
A lot of our members, and I don't know about a lot, but I'm sure there are teachers who are members. They join as voters, as parents. They don't join as teachers per se. But how do you protect public education if you don't take care of your teachers? We don't have policy positions on teachers' issues specifically. Like, for example, we just had a tenure law change that had some provisions that change the way teachers are evaluated, how many years it takes to get tenure, how you can lose tenure. And we really stayed out of that discussion. We felt that the union was in the best position to advocate for the teachers, and we have limited bandwidth. We're a volunteer organization. And honestly, we probably couldn't come to consensus on those issues anyway. I think they're contentious issues, so we just stay entirely out of them. But we support teachers. Good teachers are really a cornerstone of education. You can't bash teachers and expect your schools to be good.
Right. I think my question was more intended for the other side of the equation. Do you feel like you get good support from the teachers in the missions and activities you're trying to do?
Well, the ones who are members, and as I said, I'm sure that we have, teachers who are members. I don't know how many. I don't know if it's 5% or 10% or 2%. The ones who are members support our work, but we don't specifically reach out to teachers because obviously public school supporters are broader than that.
Right.
So, but we have, like I was we had a table maybe a month ago at a parent summit that the Teachers Union in Trenton organized. And they invited a number of organizations that deal with children to come and table there. So we had a table there, and we signed up a fair number of new members because we're always signing up more people. So we have a good working relationship, but we don't have any sort of constant communication or anything like that. It's just, we're all fighting for good public education,
right.
And there's a whole bunch of groups, and they're one of them, and we're one of them. New Jersey actually has a lot of organizations that are, because we have good schools, there's a lot of organizations that have a commitment to preserving public education at that quality level, and we work together. Like NAACP, Latino Institute, there's a whole bunch of organizations like that, League of Women Voters, Education Law Center, that's a real gem. They're a wonderful organization that is responsible for the fact that we do fund our schools fairly, and we do work with them a lot.
I love to hear that. Coalitions for common causes. We talk about that kind of thing a lot, and so it's really hopeful and optimistic to hear that.
Absolutely. We could never do it alone. And the other organization I want to mention is Parents Across America, which is an organization that formed a little after we formed, and it's a bunch of folks like us from across the country who are doing different things in their states. And they came together and formed this national network of people who are trying to protect public education from the ground up. So parent-driven activists. So if your viewers are interested and they don't live in New Jersey, they may want to look up Parents Across America. We're an affiliate. There's chapters of affiliates.
Okay.
Since we're already our own entity, we're an affiliate, but we get their information, and they're doing great work.
Yeah. I absolutely want to connect you with these people in Oakland because I think they would love to talk with you about some of this stuff. How does the media support your guys' activities and the information? You get fairly good media response?
Well, we don't have a lot of media left in New Jersey. We have had, we've seen the decline of newspapers, as has most of the country. Unfortunately, the New York Times is pretty much pulled out of New Jersey with some important exceptions, but for the most part, they don't cover the state very much, and they particularly don't cover the central and southern part of the state. The coverage they do provide is in the north. The Philadelphia Inquirer, does cover to some degree the southern and central part of the state, but both of those papers are primarily focused elsewhere. And we don't really have a state paper. We have some regional papers, but they've really shrunk back a lot. And so that's a huge problem in New Jersey. We had a wonderful public television network, NJN, which covered a lot of things in detail with really intelligent reporting. Unfortunately, they were shut down. The governor pretty much killed them and sold off their assets. And so one of the biggest challenges in New Jersey is that we don't have much media, but we have some very good education reporters. There's an online-only portal called NJ Spotlight, which has one of its founders was an education reporter for one of what used to be the big papers in the state. His name is John Mooney, and he is, he writes every day about education, and he's very good. And we have a good relationship. And there's a number of other reporters across the state, Leslie Brody up in the Bergen Record. I mean, there's a bunch of them in Philly Inquirer, etc. And so we do have a good relationship. They see us, they've seen us kind of grow from a small, small entity to become more of a player. And I think they give us fair coverage. Again, I think the biggest issue is that we don't have like a daily newspaper that everybody reads. I don't know if anyone has a newspaper anymore that everybody reads, but there are some towns or some states where, there's a paper that's sort of the dominant one, like the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times, and we just don't have that in New Jersey, and that's really hard.
Yep.
But we're actually looking to creating kind of our own news in a way, because we have all these organizers on the ground who know what's happening at the local level. And so we're going to try to create more online content based on what they're seeing to inform our members and others, and to have more of a community voice in the coverage. It's too top down.
Right.
Not everybody's coverage tends to be too top down. And I don't think that's what we need. It's either too top down and too kind of press release driven, somebody important, quote unquote, puts out a press release and that's what everybody runs with. And there's not enough time for the kind of important in-depth reporting and the local storytelling. And so we want to try to address that more ourselves.
Right.
So that's an evolving. Stay tuned.
That's wonderful. And you just were talking again about the organizers on the ground, and I suspect that they have a lot of opportunity for face-to-face, person-to-person outreach, which we're becoming more cognizant of that being the single best method to get to people. It's not the most efficient time and energy-wise, but it works better.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to open up the chat for some questions, and while we're waiting for those to come up, do you have any closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to put out there that we haven't touched on?
No, I think you've been very thorough. Just that I know you've got the website and the Facebook page available for people, and if they're interested, they can sign up on either our Facebook page or our website to receive those action alerts, and they can follow us and like us on Facebook. Our website is www.saveourschoolsnj.org, and I don't remember the URL for the Facebook page, but if they Google Save Our Schools NJ, it'll come right up.
Zena's been posting all that as you reference it. So we make the pad available to everybody too. So if you have any things that you wanted to add that you thought about during the discussion, that pad stays live, so you can just add to it at your leisure, and people will appreciate that. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions here. The first one is, what impact has your organization had on the public school lunch program?
I don't think we've had any impact on that I'm aware of. As I said, we pretty much stick to the core 3 or 4 issues because we are volunteer and we just can't take on everything.
Right.
So I don't think we've had any impact. I mean, there's a whole challenge going on with a proposal to change the way funding is allocated. Right now, a lot of it is based on free and reduced lunch. And the New Jersey administration has proposed to change that, but that's an evolving thing, and I don't think that's even what the person's asking. I think they're specifically asking about the lunches themselves versus the way that the classification is used. So,
right. Well, that's an outgrowth from another show we did about school lunches and GMOs and all that.
Right. No, we out of that too.
Okay. Well, I like that you focus on what you focus on, and you keep attention there, because that's more effective than being so scattered on. I mean, there's so many things to work on.
Absolutely.
Somebody is asking what the classroom size per teacher generally is in New Jersey schools.
I don't know what the exact number is, but we have a good ratio for the most part. I'm going to guess it's like 18 to 20. Depends on the grade level, obviously. Mm-hmm. I know in my daughter, I mean, it was extraordinary. And I'm in a very, very good school district. And in second grade, she had 14 kids in her class. So the teacher joked that her friends who teach in private school are jealous. So, no, we have excellent schools. We really do. People should move to New Jersey and then fight to defend those schools.
You're building a pretty compelling case, I have to say. We have somebody that wants you to look in your crystal ball and tell us, where do you see public education in the next 5 years?
Oh, wow. Gosh, there's so many unknowns, right? I think that the recession. I mean, there's a lot of drivers to the attack on public education. We talked about the fact that the demographic shift with fewer people having kids and with the people who do have young kids becoming increasingly black and brown and poor, that's a big factor. I think it's a huge factor. There's also that has opened up the opportunity for profit making in the sense that if you have fewer people defending public education because fewer people have kids attending schools, I think there's a whole industry that sees public education as a large dollar sign, a $500 billion dollar sign. You have hedge funds, you have private equity funds, they have conferences now for private equity funds who invest in education and see this as a great frontier, whether it's virtual charter schools or content in some other way or publishing or tests are huge. Standardized tests are a huge industry. There's a whole literature on Pearson's and how much money they're making. And these companies are all kind of interwoven. So there's the profit taking, there's the demographic changes, and then there's ideology. And the ideology has been there for a while, but I think there's a concentration of big money that has gone into breaking apart public education. I mean, it sounds like neurosis, but I mean, it's all documented. Folks who are openly putting resources into privatizing public education for ideological reasons. And so that nexus of bringing all that together is what's, I think, increasing the threat right now and making it so dramatic. And where is it going to be in 5 years? I'm going to be optimistic and say that a lot of these deforms, like vouchers, like unlimited charter school expansion without the demographic representation, without the local democratic control, that it's going to hit a point of diminishing returns. There was a great expose on vouchers in the New York Times, I think about a month or two ago as well. So there's a lot more coming out about scandals and exploitation and certainly the segregation that I talked about earlier. I do think that, things will turn and will start trending in a better direction. It would be helpful if the Obama administration was pro-public education in terms of not moving against local democratic control and not pushing models on districts that don't work for them. We haven't talked about testing. I think standardized testing is a huge issue, and you're seeing that was sort of the first frontier in this, this threat to public ed with No Child Left Behind. You're seeing a growing revolt against that. I think that's the first wave. The next wave is going to be to reform charter laws and to stop the kind of the push of charters against community wishes. So I do think it's going to move in a good direction, but there's a big battle ahead. There's a new movie coming out that promotes something called The Parent Trigger. And it's a big Hollywood, very slick film about this. And what The Parent Trigger is, it's something that started in California. It's this idea that if you pass this legislation and a certain percentage of parents in a particular public school vote yes, the school is converted into a charter school. It's closed down, a certain number of the principals, a certain number of teachers are fired, it's turned into a charter school. Completely senseless, right? Why does private management improve the school? It doesn't. What improves the school, we know what improves the school. You have to have not such a high concentration of poverty, you have to have the resources, you need smaller class sizes. There's a lot of stuff that we know works. And this ideology of closing schools down, this kind of corporate mentality, we're going to offshore the kids, we're going to bring the size down. I mean, this is a total corporate lift, and it didn't work very well in the corporate world, and it's certainly not working in education. So I think despite the fact that the big money is arrayed against us, we're going to prevail. I really believe that because all the passion is on our side.
And I always think passion and organization will beat money every time if you can just have the stamina. So that's the call to action for all the listeners and all the viewers is we have to be aware, informed, and active. And that's how we can turn the tide. So I think that's a good place to wrap up. I really appreciate your time and your energy, your passion and enthusiasm, and thank you so much for coming to us with facts and examples. It's a good illustration. you should be very proud of the work you and your organization are doing, and it's very inspiring.
Thank you very much. And I just want to be clear that the organization, I'm not the leader of the organization. I mean, the organization is very grassroots and we don't really have a hierarchy. So I'm just one of the founders. So I appreciate that you gave me the chance to kind of lay out our vision, but it really is a grassroots group effort. So
Even
I just don't want
better.
people to get the impression that it's,
Yeah.
what's that?
I said even better. It's like, that's what makes it so wonderful, and that's what is going to make it successful. And thank you for being,
Thank you.
thank your organization for us for being such a good model. The
Thank you
chatters
for profile.
are just, sending, I have to pass thanks along from them and for all the information you've shared and for the time you've given us. It's been a really good evening, a really educational and valuable evening for us, and we are grateful. So,
Thank you very
um,
much. I'm looking forward to seeing future broadcasts. So.
well, thank you.